Hi, I'm Dino, and welcome to FFTV, and this is the High Press. So, got a really important guest with us today. We've got an amazing podcast with a young ragamuffin growing up in the Northeast. We'll go through some very tough times he had in his childhood, and when amazingly, in a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance, he befriended Brian Clough and the Forest team. What followed that is an extraordinary story. I hate reading, but I've read his book, and it literally brought me tears of laughter and tears of sadness. It's an incredible story. When I say it's a unique story, it really is. The book's called Be Good, Love Brian, and it made the Times Book of the Year shortlist, the Daily Mail Sports Book of the Year shortlist, and was a finalist in the coveted William Hill Award. So talk to me about when you were growing up as a youngster in the Northeast and kind of, what your living conditions were like, what your family life was like.
So the earliest memory I've got is me being maybe just older than 2. My mum and dad were married, but they were going through difficult times, and he ended up smashing a mirror over my mum's head. And I remember just being out in the street crying with the social services coming to get us. So the first memory I've got really is of being taken away from my mum, put in a kid's home aged 2. My older brother was 6. My sister had been 4. She got taken away from us as well because we were in an all boys home. So for 2 years I didn't get to see my sister. My mum had come and visit, but they basically decided between the two of them, mum and dad, that either they didn't want us or they couldn't handle us. So in a kid's home from 2 till round about 4, and we had 6 months back. Then we were back in a kid's home again from like 4.5 to 6.5, back in a kid's home from 7 till 9. Lived well below the poverty line, lived in like some of the roughest areas in Sunderland. We lived in the roughest area because we got evicted from the second roughest for not paying our bills. And then my mum made a decision to marry, not the best decision as it turns out, but made a decision to marry a Jamaican Geordie drug dealer.
Okay.
Which,
is there such a thing?
Yeah, as you do. I think she met him. He was like a proper, larger than life character, muscle bound, curly jet black hair, obviously, dark skin, black. And the racism up in Sunderland at that point was really, really bad. He brought with him one kid from his previous marriage, who ended up obviously being our stepbrother Aaron, and he was mixed race. And that just led to 5, 6, 7 years of absolute just abuse, bullying. I'd get beaten up pretty much every day going to school just because my brother was mixed race and my dad was black. And even some of the teachers at school, it got to this stage where I just didn't want to go to school anymore because one of the teachers would make a smart ass comment. So for a really intelligent kid, it was difficult because I'd say I probably spent, no exaggeration, 60-70%. Once I got past the first year of comp, 70% of my time I didn't go to school.
Right.
Mum and dad would keep me off to go and do messages, to pick up drugs from my dad, to go shoplifting, or to do whatever we could to raise money. We weren't scruffy. We were. I think we were cleanish, but we didn't have any gear. Our clothes were a mess. I had one pair of trousers, one shirt that I had to wear to school and outside, one pair of shoes. My dad used to cut my hair, so for 6 months my hair would be, out there. So kids would just take the piss, as kids do. And Southwark was an area for that. You had to learn very, very early doors to stand on your own 2 feet. And unfortunately, I wasn't very good at it.
So how far did the racism go? I mean, other than you talked about, in your book, you talked about the N-word and, getting that sort of abuse. How did that come into your everyday life, and how bad did it get at home?
I mean, it got really bad. We had our house, there was riots in Southwick. I think a group of kids hijacked a bus and set fire to some bins and, took the money off the bus driver, and then everything just kicked off and there was a massive riot. And we got our house petrol bombed, which wasn't a nice experience. We'd gone away to Alnwick Castle for the day, which for us was the best holiday we could ever really expect. And when we came back, our house had been broken into. There was National Front logos daubed all over the wall in human shit. Everything that we owned had been slashed. Windows had been broken. And go back home and things like that. And then one other instance that sticks in my mind a lot was my dad was a fighter. He was a real hard man, but people used to come and challenge him. And I'm talking literally walk up to the front door and we'd see my dad fighting in the front garden. And this one Friday night, it'd been a little bit of weather in town and somebody knocked on the door about 11 o'clock. My sister answered and this lad just took a baseball bat to my sister's leg and broke her leg. Again, just because she was the daughter of the N. So really tough, psychologically really difficult because you don't understand as a kid,
So you must have been quite a loner then. I think there was probably you and Aaron were quite close, weren't you? Or quite close. And did you have any other friends at school that you could like play football in the street with, or?
Yeah, I didn't really develop into football until quite late. I wasn't very good at football when I was a kid. I was very good as a runner. And that came from like years
for obvious reasons.
Hey, I used to I'd run to the shops and I'd be hurdling over walls for no reason, just like to practice, just in case I need a quick getaway. So I kind of developed into football once I'd met, further down the line. But I had a group of mates. I mean, it wasn't, I wasn't a loner as such. I had a group of mates who tried to protect me, but it's like 4 or 5 of them. Good lads, really, really nice lads who never saw the race as an issue. But there weren't many. It was like a really close-knit group.
So how did you obviously lived under a certain amount of poverty. How did you sort of make money when you were young?
Jesus Christ. However we could. I mean, that's like another thing, Aside from the homes, we ended up in battered wives hostels a lot because my dad would drink as well as selling cannabis. He was a massive drunk. And we used to have to do whatever we could to get him money, to the extent that my mum would send us to my nana's to steal. Wait till nana goes to sleep or wait till granddad goes to sleep. If they won't lend you the money, where she keeps her purse. Wait till she goes asleep and nick a couple of quid or a fiver. And what that also led to is when we went back with nothing, it was fucking horrible because we were blamed. We'd be in a battered wives hostel and the other three kids, and sometimes I would do it as well. The other 3 kids, so my 2 brothers and my sister, would be blaming the one who didn't get the money, saying it's your fault we're here. All you had to do was steal a fiver off Nana. So like the physical and psychological abuse we took from the age of 7 to 14, 15, that was just horrible. The pressure we were under as kids to get money was immense. We used to do anything we could. We'd wash people's cars. We'd tidy people's gardens. There was a thing where we'd stand outside of pubs and watch people's cars. Like, watch your cars for 10 pence, mister. They'd go into the pub for 2 hours. We'd bugger off and have a game of footy in the car park. And then when they came back out, we'd say we'd watched your car, give us 10 pence. So we'd do anything we could. Our Darren was a really intelligent lad, very, very entrepreneurial for his age. And he was like, he just used to come up with schemes all the time to help us make money. But it was done purely to save my mum from getting a beating from my dad. We never saw any of it. We didn't get pocket money. We didn't have any treats or anything like that. It was done purely to get him money to go out drinking, because if we could get him a couple of quid, we knew man was safe.
So you obviously didn't have much at the time. You didn't feel you had much prospect in life going forward, and then obviously your life changed. What was that catalyst of change? What happened?
Well, Darren discovered or came up with a thing, penny for the guy, which your older viewers will know and remember. Younger ones not so much, but it's where you dress a doll up in clothes, stuff it with newspaper, stand outside shops or pubs and ask people for money. And we've done that for like a couple of years already. And then this one year, our Darren, we just walked down the pubs the length of Sunderland and see which one was the best. And then we just happened upon the Seaburn Hotel, which was on the seafront, which was the poshest hotel in Sunderland at the time. And we were doing penny for the guy there. And like just a massive, massive stroke of luck, because we weren't even supposed to go that night, Dino. We were supposed to go the Saturday, but because it was Friday and it was payday, Aaron said, look, let's just try it, see what it's like. And we went down on the Friday night, and the Forest team were staying at the Seaburn Hotel on the seafront.
Were they playing Newcastle or Sunderland?
Yeah, Newcastle up at St James's.
Yeah. So how did you meet them? What happened? Who did you meet first? Did you meet Brian Clough first, or was it another member of the team?
No, and it wasn't even, I'll talk about Kenny Swain, who had a massive impact, but I'd just got my I'm going to say my head kicked in, but it probably wasn't as bad as that. I used to have somebody with a racist skinhead who would come and either take our money or boot the guy all over. And he'd just been along like 5-10 minutes before, kicked me in the stomach, kicked the guy everywhere. And a couple of blokes had come out from the Indian restaurant behind to chase him away. And as that was happening, 4 Forest players were walking along. They obviously saw what was going on, came up, asked us if we were okay, asked us what we were doing, gave us like a 150 or something like that, which was a fortune, and said, look, don't stay out too late because you'll be bothered by the drunks. So I think the first group, it would have been Chrissy Fairclough was definitely in it, Bryn Gunn was there, Peter Davenport. Yeah, some unreal names, for that era from like 84 to 87, before he built the second team. There was some unbelievable legends there.
Did you know there were Forest players at the time?
I had no clue, literally no idea. I honestly thought it was the Sunderland basketball team, and I don't know why, but it was like the only thing I could think of. Yeah. The only team I could think of. I had no real interest in football. And now Aaron turned around and said to me, "Look, they've got some kind of cauliflower on the top. It's not the Sunderland basketball team." You know what I mean? And it turned out it was the tree.
Oh my God! I hope there's no Derby fans watching this, because they're going to start with the cauliflower jokes now. So they essentially saved you and gave you a bit of money, and that was quite a nice moment for you. But then was there any further meeting with them, or did you stalk them, or
it gets better and better? We decided at that point we only had one guy between us, Dino. So Aaron was at the back of the hotel asking people for money, and he didn't even have a guy. I was at the front asking people for money, and Aaron, if somebody said, "Well, you haven't got a guy," he had to send them round to me. So anyway, after the skinhead came, we decided it's going to be safer if we both get off the main road and go around the back. And we're standing outside the back of the hotel for literally like 5 minutes. And a player walks around the corner on his own. So obviously we ask him for a penny for the guy. He does the old tap in his pocket saying he's got no change, which loads of people used to do. I thought it was like taking the piss. And I'm like, "Listen, mister, it's okay. We take American Express, MasterCard." He started chuckling. And then I said, "Look, mister, my mate thinks, my brother thinks he's the Sunderland basketball team. And he's got no son. We're Nottingham Forest. We play football. We're playing Newcastle tomorrow." And obviously I said, "Look, I hate Newcastle." And he's like, "Well, so do I." And then I asked him if we could have the autographs. He came back down. First of all, he came back down and gave us a $5, Dino.
Wow.
10 minutes after he said, "I'll be back down in a minute." And in those days, a $5 was huge. So at that point, I said to him, "Listen, do you mind if we get the autographs?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." Went back in, came back out about 5 minutes later and said, "Listen, son, most of the players have gone to bed. There's some of the autographs there. If you want the rest, come back tomorrow." Again, probably hoping and praying he'd never see us again.
When did you first meet Brian Clough then?
So Swaney had told us to be there for 10 o'clock in the morning. And we were on the beach for 7:30 waiting for them. And I think about 8:30, 9:30, we just... Aaron went swimming, which is absolutely nuts because it's October. Aaron went swimming, and I used to think I was
northeast.
Yeah, bloody hell, absolutely mental. Just literally everything off down to his pants and in. And I used to practice. At that point, I was an absolute in my head. I was a certainty to do the 800 and 1500 double up at the Olympics. So I was practicing running along the beach with Chariots of Fire going in my head. And I just see how Aaron waving at the top of the steps, and he shouts me back, and I'm hoping he's found something. And I walk up to him, I say, "Look, what's up?" And he says, "Look at that man like walking there." And I'm like, "Right." And he's gone, "That's Brian Clough." And I'm like, "Who?" And he said, "It's Brian Clough. He's like this really, really famous football manager. He's on the telly every week. He's in the newspapers. He's like really, really famous. Go and say hello to him, but he shouts a lot." And I'm like, bloody hell, okay, fair enough. So I was like, what was I? I was 11. And I just walked up to him like, nice as ninepence. Good morning, Mr. Clough. Can you tell me if Kenny Swain's up yet? And he absolutely loved the fact I called him Mr. Clough.
Yeah,
he was just blown away by it. He's like, he had this thing where he would always go, "Wee." He'd say, "Wee, son, Mr. Clough, Mr. Clough. Did your man tell you to call me Mr. Clough?" And I turned around and said, "Yeah, until I get to know you better, I've got to call you Mr. Clough." And he's like, "Hey, you cheeky little sod, get to know me better." Blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, "Why do you want Kenny?" And I explained the story from the night before, and he's like looking us up and down. Obviously, we're, scruffy by his standards. And he's like, "Look, you look freezing. Where's your coats? Does your mum know you're here? And you look like you haven't had a decent meal for months. I'll tell you what, come with me. I'll get you some breakfast. You can get the players' autographs. Everybody will be happy, and then you can bugger off back home." And he took us into the hotel to have breakfast with the players. And Kenny Swain's like, when we walked in, Kenny Swain's face has just dropped, because obviously he's like, "Holy shit, Gaffer, what have I done here?" 2 kids. And the bloke at the hotel used to chase us, Dino. We'd bother his customers, so he used to chase us. So when he's seen us walking through the revolving doors, he's like, "Oh, you two, it's off out, get out. What have I told you about coming in here?" And Brian's turned around and said to him, "Listen, young man, don't talk to kids like that." He said, "They're with me. They're coming with me. We're taking them upstairs for about an hour. They're going to have some breakfast and then they'll leave. Now, have a good day." And we just sat with them for probably 45 minutes, just having like weird conversations that me and Aaron were like funny, but we didn't know we were funny. We asked them where they were from, and they said it's Nottingham, which is in the Midlands. And our Aaron said, "What's the beach like in the Midlands?" And they all pissed themselves laughing. And I'm thinking, well, why are they laughing? Obviously, now Midlands is middle of the land. And then after about 45 minutes, an hour after we got marmalade, toast, cornflakes and everything, Kenny Swain came up to us and said, "Listen, the gaffer thinks you relax the players. He wants to know if you want to come to the game with us today. We'll take you on the team bus. We'll get you tickets. You can watch the game. You're going to have to come back on your own. But if that's all right with you, you can come to the game with us." And we're like, "Yeah, of course, we'd love to." And he's like, "Well, you need to ask your mum and dad." And I'm like, "Well, we haven't got a phone." And he's like, "Well, you've got to ask your mum and dad. We can't just take you." So me and Aaron ended up running 1.5 miles back up to Southwick, asking my mum and dad, who really thought we were like proper taking the mickey, because we needed 10 pence for our bus fare. And they thought we were just trying to get 10 pence off them to go out and spend it on sweets. And my dad's like, "Are you taking the piss? You're trying to tell me that a football team that you only met last night and this morning and now wanted to take you to," and we're like, "Dad, honest, that's exactly what's happening." So we've ended up, running 1.5 miles back down, got on the team bus, got to St. James's Park. Kenny's given us another £5 for Bovril and crisps and stuff like that. And we've gone into St. James's Park to watch the game. It was freezing, and like I say, we didn't have coats, so we ended up leaving after like 70 minutes. I think it was 1-1. I think Davenport got the Forest goal. And I felt really guilty because I hadn't said, stop to say thank you or even see you later. So it was just like playing on my mind. So I wrote them a letter the next day when I got back, just saying, "Listen, thank you very much for an unbelievable day. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed meeting you and the lads. Good luck, Craig. Not sure what would happen after that, not really expecting anything." And about 4 or 5 days later, there's a letter popped back through the front door. Our postman's Bob. We knew him really well, and he's like running up to us saying, lads, I've got something for you." And it's a big brown envelope with a forest crest on the front. And Brian had sent us a letter saying, "Lads, it was great to meet you. You did your man proud. Tell us you can be really proud of you. Make sure you stick in at school. And next time we're up in the northeast, come and say hello to us again. And be good," which is how we always used to sign his autographs. "Be good, love, Brian." Yeah. And again, probably not expecting to see us for a while, because Newcastle were in the first division, but Sunderland were in the second. And obviously, once they played Newcastle, that was it for another season. And then by a massive stroke of luck, they drew Sunderland in the, I don't know what it was at the time. It wasn't the Rumbelows or the Littlewoods. It was the League Cup. and they drew Sunderland up at Roker Park, like December the 30th or something like that. So, you know, within 3 or 4 weeks of seeing them, we were going to go and see him again. And that's how it really started from there.
So obviously there's some stalking missions going on from yourself every time that they played in the Northeast. Did you ever come to Nottingham area at any point?
Like
spend time with the players there.
Much later down. So I mean, not much later actually, because everything happened really quickly. But we'd been to probably 4 or 5 games up in the Northeast already, you know, and they weren't always like, I don't know if they always expected us to turn up, but they're always really happy to see us when we were there. It's like, bloody hell, you know, you two again, we can't get rid of you. But the October 85, they were playing Newcastle again at St James's, and I think it's the League Cup. And I think we either beat them 3-1 or 3-0. And we've again rocked up at St James's Park, but Swaney's been transferred to Portsmouth the summer before, so we literally didn't know if we should go, because obviously
he was your first contact, wasn't he?
Well, Swaney used to babysit us, you know.
Yeah.
We spent time with Brian and the other players, but it's actually Kenny we go to see more than Brian. So we weren't sure whether we should go at all once Kenny's gone, and we decided like last minute that we were going to go. And when we got on the team bus outside of St James's, Brian's like, "You do know Kenny's gone, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I've come to say hello to you." And he's like, "All right, fair enough. Get down the back of the bus, get some soup, keep quiet, get your head down." And that was the first time they actually took us into the dressing room. So we beat Newcastle 3-0. Brian's like, before the game, he's given us like a list of things that we need to do. It's like, sit down, shut up, keep your head down. If the players, he said he's only got one rule in his dressing room. I've only got one rule in my dressing room, lads. And I'm like, right, okay. And then he went on to list like 7 bloody rules. And I'm sitting there thinking, holy shit, how am I supposed to remember all this?
He meant one chapter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at the end of the game, we're just like, you know, tidying things away, helping the players get a drink and stuff like that. And Brian's asked us how we're getting home, and we're like, we're getting the train. He's like, I'm not having you getting the train on your own this time of night. You can come and stay with us. We're like, holy, you know, everything just got massive. I mean, we only had the clothes on. We didn't know we were going anywhere. And he's like, you can come and stay with us. And he turned to Ronnie Fenton. He's gone, Ronnie, they can stay with you for a couple of days. You'll be all right with that. And Ronnie Fenton's face has just gone white. So I'm thinking Ronnie doesn't fancy it. Yeah, exactly. Proper stitched me up there. And then he's ended up getting Jim McAnally, Scottish fullback, to ring our neighbours and to ask my mum's permission that we go down to Nottingham for a few days. And he's like, all right, just tell her, you know, they're coming down for a few days. We'll look after them. And he's like, hey, son, tell her not to worry. It's Brian Clough who's asking. So Jim McAnally's like made the phone call. He's like, what the hell do I say to your mum? Your mum's never going to go for this. And of course, as soon as my mum heard it was Brian Clough who was invited, but she's like, fine, yeah, get yourselves away. I had no idea how long we're going down for, really where we were going, when we were coming back or anything, but she's like, yeah, get yourselves away, lads, don't worry about it. And then we're like sitting there down the back, and about halfway down, Brian's decided that we're going to go and stay with him. We're not staying with Ronnie because Ronnie doesn't fancy it. So we're going to go and stay with him at his place in Quandon. And we got dropped off at the San Diego Post House, as it was then, just off the M1. Driven up to his house. He's got us to get outside because he wants to explain more rules to us about like what it's like to live under his house. And that was basically the crux of that, was to say we could call him anything we want, you know, big head, shit house, Brian, anything. But if we ever call Mrs. Clough anything other than Mrs. Clough, he's going to knock our 2 big heads together and get us to walk back.
Really? You still call her Mrs. Clough now, don't you, today?
I do. I've never been, even when she said to me, and obviously I'm living there, and she's like, listen, son, it's about time you start calling me Barbara. And I'm like, you're kidding? Huh? Yeah. It's more than my life's worth, not a chance. So, yeah, I still call him Mrs. Clough today.
He's certainly an enigma, isn't he, or was, Brian Clough, because he come across as quite arrogant on the TV in his interviews, and old big head, and, you know, I'm number one, and he had a lot of run-ins with people. But I think behind closed doors, was he a bit more of a? He seemed to have a nice culture and a nice ethos. And was he a family man, a proper family man, and did he have good values?
Yeah, and I mean, all of them did. You know, they were brought up. Mrs. Clough has a lot to do with that. I think Mrs. Clough was like, you know, just an incredible woman with really, like you say, strong values, principles, morals. But she was also just like, you know, really lovely and really generous with everything that she had, giving people time, stopping to have chats with them. And Brian was exactly the same, you know. I don't know how many people know how generous he was, but I bet there's thousands of stories of things that he's done for people in Nottingham and Derby. You know, we used to go to Quandon stores, and Quandon's a really posh place, and there's a bloke behind there, Brian had a tab, where he'd just go in and get what he wanted, and he'd square up later. And the number of times that he walked in there, and there's like an old woman doing her shopping, and he's like, "Pet, just put that on my tab." You know, and that's Quandon, where people are pretty wealthy. I don't think she was worried about where our next loaf was coming from, but he just used to be really, really generous with everybody he bumped into. Just really, really nice-hearted. He could be arrogant, you know.
Yeah,
he could be arrogant. I mean, he had that switch, you know, where if you did something he didn't agree with, or you got on the wrong side of him, he could absolutely floor you with a verbal, you know, not a lashing, because he never really lashed me. But he'd just be like really sarcastic or really funnily clever. So he definitely still had that confident, arrogant side, but it was nowhere near how it was portrayed.
How do you think he demanded so much respect from the players then? Because everybody would die for him, wouldn't they, on the playing team and the playing staff?
Yeah, it's weird. I was talking to my mate who's a massive Forest fan, even though he's from Sunderland, a lad called Lee. And he was saying, you know, a lot of it is down to the fact he was successful. He thinks that if Brian had got to like semi-finals and quarterfinals and stuff like that and hadn't won anything, the same players who now idolise him and won't say a word against him would probably be coming out and saying, Jesus Christ, what a shit. Because he also had that with the players, you know. I think he knew who to knock down, and he knew who to build up, but also he cared about them as people. I mean, even outside of football, you know, he knew about the family, he knew about the problems, the issues, and he would do anything that he could to help them. And he was unbelievably loyal to people who were loyal to him. And I think that's a big part of it.
So you kind of strangely, randomly met Kenny Swain after you were getting a kick in. And eventually you just got closer and closer to the Clough family and the club. How close did you actually get with the club first? And then we'll talk about the Clough family.
Well, the club was really intense. You know, we haven't talked yet about when I moved down with them, but let's talk about just before that. So before that, it was like it was on the periphery, but it was still on the first team bus, traveling to games with him. It was staying in the hotel overnight with him. It was being in the dressing room, you know, White Hart Lane, Goodison, Anfield, Old Trafford, just some unbelievable experiences from that side. But of course, it got a lot closer to everybody, not just the players, but the club and the family. I mean, the club, it's like it's a weird one, you know. I used to waltz in like I owned the place, literally. I'd go in.
Wage.
Brian would be like training, and I'd be walking in. I'd be knocking on the chairman's door, morning, Mr. Chairman, knocking on Ken Smales or Paul White's door.
Smales, yeah.
And I would literally like just, you know, it was like I was one of them. I'd just walk in, say hello to the cleaning ladies, walk through the back of the old Trent end, the bit before the Trent end, where you go through where the boiler room and everything is. Yeah. Walk through there, say hello to all the coaches and the physio, and then walk out the back and go training with the players and try and get as involved as I could from that side.
So you played with the players in the training?
I'd say I bothered them.
Were you any good at football at that point? You must have got better being around.
Yeah, I got a lot better. There's like, you know, there's three or four.
Who was the catalyst of you getting better? Did one of the team or a couple of the team spend any time with you on the training pitch or not?
Yeah, I mean, I went training with AC Hunters, so obviously Simon's side. Went training with them regularly, and Nigel took training. But there's two reasons. One is Nige, because he taught me how to play. He had this thing where, if you remember when he played, his first touch was usually a pass.
Yeah.
The ball had come into him and he'd just angle his foot and turn it around the corner, and it'd take 3 or 4 players out.
Yeah.
So he taught me how to do that, either foot. The ball had come into me and I'd just lay it off. But then also Scott Gemmell really took me under his wing. Nigel and Scott were good mates at that point. Scott still lived in Aylesbury with his dad, and Scott was football mad. I mean, literally every second of the day he'd be wanting to play or practice. So me and him used to go in and just kick a ball about, and we ended up doing crossbar challenge.
Yeah.
One side of the goal, one the other side of the goal. If you hit the crossbar, the ball typically came back to you, and you'd get another go at it. If you missed, it went over the bar or under the bar, and it's the next person's turn. So we'd be doing that, and it got to the stage where I could beat Scott first to 10, and that really pissed him off. He smashed me at everything else, but I could beat him hitting the crossbar from anywhere on the pitch, Dino. And really? I've made a joke about this, and it's like, I still chuckle about it now. I've gone on to play 14 or 15 seasons, sometimes to a decent standard, sometimes just, decent standard Sunday league. But I've only ever scored 6 goals from open play. I used to ping a free kick in every now and then, but from open play, only 6 goals. But I hit the bar 1,450 times. And I'm like, if it wasn't for Scott teaching me how to hit the bar, I'd have had a better scoring record than Pele.
He could have made it professional, mate.
I'd have been like, there'd be like posters of me up all over the world.
Oh my God, Scott Gemmell. I also saw his dad play as well. That's how old I am, Archie.
His dad was like, it's difficult because I really liked his dad and I respected him, but Jesus Christ, he could be a nasty bugger.
Yeah, really.
I mean, he was the one out of them all who could really, and just for no reason, his face would just go and he'd snarl and boom, he'd just lay into you. So I never really knew how to gauge Archie, and I never really worked out whether he liked me or he saw me as a bit of a little shit.
So okay, so you're training with the team randomly from this meeting, when you were a boy. What about match days? Did you get more free tickets, or were you still within the inner sanctum of the City ground?
I didn't really need free tickets. That didn't start until like 92, 93 when I started going to games with my mates more than the team or more than Simon. A lot of games I went with Simon, and Simon's like I'm going to say it now. He's chief scout at Mansfield. Back then, he was a brilliant judge of a player. So he's like
just for the chat. Simon is one of Brian's sons.
Simon's Brian's eldest. Brian's eldest son. So there's Simon, Nigel, and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But for 2 seasons, home games, like I say, I own the place. I'm waltzing in like just maybe like the cat that's got the cream. Away games, I'd either go down on the day before if they travelled on the day before and stay in the hotel with them, or I'd travel down on the same day. But it would always be on the first team coach, always be in the dressing room, always be on the pitch. There's like 3 or 4 YouTube videos that it's a shame I've never really linked them. But there's pictures of me remember, the League Cup where we've done Spurs 2-1 and Keeney's got the bullet header.
Yeah.
Elton Wellesby's done like match of the day live or whatever it is. And in the build up to the game, you see me, Roy Keane, and another player walking onto the pitch and walking back off the pitch. And of course, because of like how close I was, but also because of the things Nigel gave me and sometimes one of the other players gave me, I'm in kit. I'm in first team tracksuit. Even the apprentices didn't get a first team tracksuit. If you remember, the first team tracksuit used to have the Umbro on the back.
Yeah.
Badge. And the others didn't. So the others were like just, like you could buy in the shop.
You're the elite.
And I'd be walking around Nottingham in a first team tracksuit when I was like 16, 17, giving it absolute big licks, telling everybody I was going to be the next big thing.
So when you're kicking around in the dressing room on match days and like the dugout and things like that, what do the other opposing managers think of you?
I don't know about...
We've not scouted this guy. Who's this guy?
Yeah. Think I'm some kind of secret weapon who's come on for the last 20 minutes. I don't know. It got to a stage where for me it was pretty weird because underneath everything I was a massive, massive fan. I mean, I loved the players, I loved the game, but I was just a fan. I wasn't one of the players who was like removed from it because they're playing. but I wasn't allowed to be a fan because when you're sitting in the dugout, you know, and you score, you can't go nuts celebrating. It didn't happen back then. And there were literally times where I've said before, when we scored at Anfield, I wanted to get out, run along the track and start flicking Kenny Dalglish to V's. Yeah, you Scottish bastard, have that. And Brian used to have to get me to calm down. Yeah. He'd like say to me, son, you know, just if we scored or something, I'd be going nuts in the back corner. And he ended up like saying to me, Jesus Christ, would you just like shut up, calm down? I've got a job to do here. And I've said this before. I don't know, like I would imagine John Sumter, who's the ex-club photographer, he'll probably have a lot of photographs. So for the first like 12 or 15 games, I'm sitting next to Brian, and then he twigged down, which I talked during the game, and he kept moving me like one further away, and by the end of it, I'm stuck in the corner with like as far away as I could possibly
furthest away from Cooper now. I'll have to have a look at that.
But half-time team talks, full-time team talks. Things like that, you know, to sit and watch those. And that was the point where I was quiet because it's not, you know, it's not my place to say anything. And some of the things, like just quiet little things that are not, people always ask why he was such a genius. It's just a sentence. And it's like a common sense sentence, but it's the way he says it, it's who he says it to, and then it's the effect on the player themselves. I remember being away at QPR and Gary Parker's playing, I think he's playing central midfield for us rather than the right-hand side. And the England squad's about to be announced and they're talking about recalling Ray Wilkins. And Brian's like, you know, all respect to Ray Wilkins, was a great player, but he's called the Crab for a reason. He just literally used to get the ball and give it, you know, left or right and blah, 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 blah. And Brian's just turned around to Parks before the game. He said, I'll tell you what, Parks, all this talk about bringing Ray Wilkins back, he said, son, I'd have you every day of the week and twice on Sunday ahead of him in that squad. Now go out and show me why. And you literally saw Gary Parks had a big chest anyway, as well as a big nose. I mean, he was like, you know, the way he could run. But you literally saw his chest just fill out and he grew. He grew an inch. And I saw that like 6, 7, 8 players where he would say something to them and they would just like, you know, they would just lift. And we're not talking about superstars here, Dino. I mean, you look at the signings he made, you know. What was it? Webby cost us 400 grand. Piercy 375. Ian Butterworth was more expensive than Piercy. Lawsey 275. Tommy Gaynor 25 grand. Up until the point where he signed that season where he signed Sheringham, Kingsley Black and Carl Tyler, I think his most expensive signing was 400 grand.
Thanks, David, for the question. What was Clough's go-to breakfast item? Hope it wasn't a bowl of shredded wheat.
It wasn't shredded wheat. It was bacon sarnies. He used to make the most unbelievably delicious bacon sandwiches ever.
He did, or Mrs. Clough?
He did. No, he loved being in the kitchen. He was brilliant. He'd like... It was also his way of relaxing. You know, Sunday, if we didn't go out to the Xingdu, which is the Chinese restaurant, he would cook a Sunday dinner. And he'd cook for like 6, 7 or 8. And he'd just shut the door, have a tea towel over his back. And if anybody walked in to disturb him, he'd tell him to piss off out.
Mark, I became a Forest fan in 1975. Mark Gilson, because my dad, we loved it when we would salute the train. When he would salute the train, and I used to love that too. He brought me so much happiness as a child. And into an adulthood. Was he happy, would you say, through the period that you knew him? Would you say he's a happy individual? Because we obviously, late in his later years, we saw his health decline. But was he generally happy?
He had a couple of down spells, that's for sure. I think there was a point where he had to loan the club 56 grand of his own money because they were close to going bust, and he had to stave off the tax man. The other thing that used to frustrate him was in Ken Smale's office, which was later Paul White's office, there used to be like an electronic turnstile counter. Yeah. And he'd go in there half an hour before the game and we're playing Liverpool and there's only 14,000 in. And we'd just beaten Aston Villa 6-2. We've beaten Chelsea 7-1. We beat Norwich 6-2, I think, away from home, or 5-2 away from home. And he's like, bloody hell, what do I have to do to fill the ground? So that used to frustrate him a little bit. But also it was the times, do you know? I mean, football crowds at the time weren't massive anywhere. Yeah. But then he had like a second spell where and for me, that this was like the most beautiful thing to see him in his pomp, because I didn't see the European team and I didn't know what he was like. But 87, 88, 89, when that young crop came through, Jesus Christ, he had such a spring in his step. I mean, he was bouncing into work. He'd get into work like earlier than anybody else. He'd stay longer than anybody else. Even though he wasn't always on the training ground, he just loved it because there were so many good young players coming through, you know. Gary Charles, Terry Wilson, Lee Glover. And then it went to another level when he signed Keeney. I've never seen anything like it in terms of the energy coming from a player given to a manager, because he knew he'd found someone absolutely special, and he just again
wasn't that like a 20 grand deal from Cove Ramblers or something? It was
something like that, yeah, 25,
nothing.
26 grand and some tracksuits or something.
We've got some creative people in our chat. You realise that? That's your next book. It's your next book idea, Clough's Secret Recipes.
The coconut curry that he used to make is to die for, and I know that sounds weird.
Clough's Special Bacon is the first one. So you've got two. There you go. Right, staying on Keno then. I mean, what was he like to be around? Because he seems quite outwardly aggressive, assertive. Was he like that behind the scenes?
I wouldn't really say aggressive. I mean, I don't think he's probably grown that side of it more as he's got older, you know, where he realizes the type of things he can do and who he is and that kind of thing. But he was never quiet, but he wasn't like, you know, I think it probably like took 18 months. I've read stories about him going to Black Oak and being a little bit of a big head and things like that. I didn't see it. I really didn't see it. You know, he walked in, I think, he came across for a trial. He's staying at the digs at Collick Road, and I'm at that point. I'm on the other side of Collick Road where the two pro houses are. So I'm living with Sean Dyche, Craig Boardman, Mick Danzy, and Jock McLaughlin. And Kenny's on the other side with the young kids, and we all used to go to Barker Snooker up on Barkergate, and we'd gone up to play snooker, and Roy had to leave early because he had a meeting with the club, and he honestly thought they were sending him home. He didn't think he'd done enough. And he played against Sutton. I think he came on for like 20 minutes against Sutton away, and we were 2-0 down. And again, it's like people think it's hyperbole, but it's not. I've never seen anybody get hold of a game at 18. He was probably even 17 still. Get hold of a game by the scruff of the neck, ran his absolute balls off, threw challenges in everywhere, ended up drawing 2-2. Anyway, Keeney thinks he's getting sent home. So we've all come back from Barker's. I get out of the taxi at the bottom of Collick Road, and you just see Roy literally bouncing down the street. Literally bouncing. Lads, you're not going to believe it. They give me a 3-year deal. Just absolutely, you know. So probably one of the first people to know Keeney had got the contract. He's just sensational. An absolute warrior.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to go back to sort of Brian Clough and you living there, but just before we do it, you know, people like who did you like in the changing room, and who did you dislike, if you're happy to say? I mean, who are the people that you really took to? Because we only ever see the outward TV. You know, we don't see much else. We don't get behind the scenes like you do.
I didn't really dislike anybody. I've said again in a few other places, the banter in the dressing room could be brutal. And I used to be on the end of it at times because I had glasses, I had big teeth, big hair. So there'd be the odd specky twat. The biggest issue I ever had, and I like him as a bloke, by the way, you know, I don't know him now, but I'm like, you know, I see who he is. But the biggest issue I ever had was with Nigel Jemson, who used to sheep bar me onto the bus. And he'd say, as the gaffer dressed me up like a sheep tonight because he was bum boy. And fucking that was destroying, absolutely destroying, because Nigel had pulled me to one side when I first started going to games on the team bus. He pulled me to one side and said, "Listen, you know, there's a rule when you're on the bus, because the players would be at the back and I'd be at the back with them, then the management down at the front." And Nigel pulled me to one side and said, "Whatever happens on the back of this bus, whatever gets said, whoever says it, whoever it's about, even if it's about you, it does not get back to my old man." this is like our area, stuff
It's
like that.
interesting.
So
What stays on the what
literally,
happens on the
like,
bus stays on the bus. Interesting.
So there were times where I would say it was bordering on bullying. But obviously, as you get older, you realise it's not bullying; it's just piss-taking banter. But it went a little bit too far with Gemmo.
Right.
Players who are liked and idolised. I mean, there's too many of them. I got on really well with Harry Hodge. Got on really well with Francie Carr. Absolutely loved Steve Chettle. Steve Chettle was just, such a great bloke. Always.
He was a Nottingham lad, wasn't he?
He was just he's superb. Bulwell boy. He used to say the shit blue bricks in Bulwell. But just a really nice lad. Then obviously, there's like a few quiet ones you can probably imagine. Nigel was pretty quiet. Scott Gemmell was pretty quiet. Franzie himself and Harry were quiet. And then you've got the real characters. You've got the absolute real characters. And it's not going to be a surprise when you find out who they are. Piercy was an absolute legend. I mean, he was just funny. He was sharp. He was funny. He was sarcastic. He was everything you can imagine him being a leader. And he was the leader. His boss. Des was a great character. Got on really well with Des. Des could knock out a brilliant line in. I'm never sure whether they were knockoffs or not, but he used to be the one who would sell the watches on the back of the bus, and he'd sell anything. I remember one time they've come on and Des is selling some designer tracksuits, and for people of this area, they might remember Gary Charles used to pull his tracksuits so high up to be like you can almost you can see his dinner, and Charles's walked on and Desi's gone, "Hey, Gaz, what size chest are you? I've got a hell of a pair of tracky bottoms." He's just like, Jesus Christ. So Des was a great character. And, this is like a nice thing. I met Des a couple of years ago on Central Avenue, just bumped into him. I haven't seen him for 25, 30 years. And I swear to God, he moved faster than he used to do in defence just to come across.
Oh, it was so quick. I mean, the song "You'll Never Beat Des Walker." I mean, it's used to
incredible player. Him and Piercy, and outside of Nigel, I just love. Him and Piercy were just absolute, just legends.
It's one from James Cunningham here. Dino, please ask about Taylor, Peter Taylor. That's obviously the dynamic duo. What are your thoughts on Peter Taylor? Did you have any relationship with Taylor? And do you think it, when he died, it affected Clough that last one?
I didn't have any relationship with him other than I'd read With Clough by Taylor, and that was a book that really annoyed Brian. First of all, I don't think he knew he was writing it, but obviously, secondly, Taylor made a lot of money out of it and didn't mention anything to Brian. Then obviously there's the Robbo signing. So I didn't know Taylor, but I have to say, based on the feeling from Brian, I didn't like him, which is just wrong. I didn't know him as a bloke, and it's only again when you take a step back and you start to analyse what they did together and how close they were together and stuff like that. So there's a point where not probably maybe even as short as 6 months before he died, Peter Taylor's come to the ground and he's waiting outside Brian's office. Somebody's let him in. He's waiting outside his office. There used to be just 2 seats there. And Brian had this thing where if somebody pissed him off or if he wanted to show that he was angry with somebody, as he passed him, he'd kick the feet. And he did that to Pete. And then he's walked into his office, called for Carol Parker or Washington, whatever she was at that time, and said to her, "Who's let that shit house in my ground?" And Carol said, "I don't know." And he's gone, "Well, look, first of all, get him out. Secondly, whoever let him in, get him fired." And Pete, I don't know why Pete came, presumably to try and say sorry or to try and make things up. But Brian didn't see him. And then obviously it gets to the point where the day that Pete died, Brian's at home. I'm in the breakfast room. Mrs. Clough's pottering around the kitchen. The phone goes, and I think it might be Alan Hill or it's Ronnie Fenton, and just said, "Listen, Gaff, I've got some really, really bad news. Pete's gone. Pete's passed away." And Brian didn't say a word. He literally just dropped the receiver. It made a crash on the floor. Dropped the receiver, walked out the back door, Went for a walk for about 6 hours, cried his eyes out. So it didn't affect him. Yes.
Yeah, it was sad. He didn't win anything for a while after that, did he? After
I think '89 was the first Simod Cup, then the League Cup. So that was a big thing for him at that point, you know, to win something on his own. But I think Nigel and Simon have talked about it. It's not my place to talk about it, but I'd say if he had one regret, it would be that he didn't make up with Pete.
So you're very much a part of the furniture at the ground, at the City Ground. How did you become more of the furniture in the Clough household?
Well, that was, again, I'm 15. My brother Aaron's joined the army. You know, I always thought that Aaron was his favourite, and I'm fairly sure Aaron was his favourite because Aaron just had like a beaming smile, always positive. Brian loved his garden, and Aaron had this thing where he could do a circle around his trees absolutely perfectly. And I mean, literally perfectly. Whereas I'd have the lawnmower out, I'd be doing it like a hexagon. He'd come out and be like, look, you're ruining it. You're killing my trees. Give it back to your brother. He'll do it better.
Where is your brother now? Where is your brother now? Oh.
He's dead.
How did he die? Can you talk about it, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You know, we talk about racism. But he came out of the army. I don't think it was brilliant from in the army. I think he had a core group of mates, but he took a bit of stick in the army as well. Came out of the army. He went to work for British Rail as a station guard. And one night, this just drunk walking along the platform and started abusing our Aaron, calling him a black this and a black that and an N this and an N that. So Aaron's knocked him out and got disciplined, got sacked. And that just sent him on a downward spiral. So he started drinking, went and lived in a one bedroom bedsit. And one night he's on medication. He tried to stop drinking. He's on medication. I think the doctors told him if he has another drink, you know, it's gonna end him. And he's took his medication. Then he's had a couple of beers and apparently forgot he took his medication, took it again, and died in his sleep.
Oh, so sad. I'm really sorry, guys. Get some love in the chat, please. Sad, really sad. I'm sorry about that. You were very close. Let's move to just a bit about what's the longest time you spent in the Clough household. I mean, how long were you there for? Because you seem to be sort of a few weeks
before or after I moved down.
Either. What's
so before it was 5 weeks. That was the 6 weeks holiday. But then obviously when I've moved in there, so when we've come back down from Scotland, basically Brian's dropped me off at Scotch Corner. And I couldn't face it. I mean, I just couldn't face going back. You know, it was the same shit. It was the same abuse. Our electricity was cut off. My dad had been arrested for headbutting his supervisor and shoplifting. And I couldn't face going back. So, like, they got to a service station about probably an hour and a half from Scotch Corner. And the lads had got off just to have a wee and maybe buy a can of pop or whatever. So, I've run away. I'm like, right, that's it. You know, I'm not going back to Sunderland. I've run away. And obviously they're looking for me. Couldn't find me for like 20 minutes. Gary Parker's eventually found me round the back at the toilets. And he's like, look, what you doing? And I'm saying, Parks, I just can't go home. I'd rather run away. And Parks is like, listen, son, you know, you need to tell the gaffer what's going on. You can't just run away. That's not going to work. So you need to man up and go and tell the gaffer. So I got back on the bus and Brian obviously asked me what had happened and I started explaining some of the stuff, not all of it, but just started explaining some of the stuff that was happening, some of the stuff that I'd been through.
You didn't know before that? You never told him anything before that?
No. I mean, he knew we weren't normal. You know, he knew we were poor, but he had no idea of what we were going through as kids. And he just said, look, I'm not having that. That's like, it's not acceptable. I don't know what we're going to do with you. But you're not getting off this bus today. You can come back down with us, stay for another few days while we work out what to do. And obviously take me back to Quarndon. This is something I've never talked about. By the time I got back to Quarndon, because I fell asleep. I was crying. I fell asleep. By the time I got back to Quarndon, I'd almost forgotten about that conversation. Like I'd forgotten that I'd told him, and it was just like boom, just like normal. And again, it was only when I started writing the book that I remembered how it happened. Because to everybody who asks me and stuff like that, I'm like, Brian invited me down to live with him. He invited me down to either play football or blah 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 blah. But the truth is, you know, he did it because of what was going on. So we got back to Quarndon. The next morning, he sent me out pretty early to take Del the dog for a walk, because him, Simon, and Nigel are having a meeting to decide what to do with me. And I've got 50 yards down the drive. I didn't even get out of the gate, and he's just shouted me back. He's gone, "Rigger, come back, son. No need to take the dog for a walk. We've decided you're moving down with us."
Wow.
And that was the start of that.
Wow. See, nobody knows this side of Brian Clough. It's just amazing to hear.
Not just
the
him,
whole family, you know.
Yeah, you know, for them, I mean, they'd already accepted us into the house anyway. You know, we never ever felt that we weren't accepted, but for them to allow me to actually go and be part of the life, you know. Nigel is 20, he's still just about living at home. Elizabeth's 19. Simon's like 22, 23, something like that, you know, more established. But Mrs. Clough as well, you know, who's already raised kids, is now accepting a scruffy little teenager to come into her house and have to do all that work again. It was just beautiful. You don't realise at the time how beautiful, you know, but when you take a step back and you're a little bit older and you appreciate it, just an incredible gesture.
He had a nickname for you, didn't he, Brian Clough?
He did. He had two. The first one was
Shithouse has got to be one, hasn't it?
No, he never called me that, actually.
Crossley.
For like a couple of times he called me Sunderland. He called me, like, you know, Big Ed or stuff like that. But he used to call me Ronnie Rinaldi, after the whistling singer, because whenever we walked around the cricket ground, if I was nervous, I would whistle. And he's like, bloody hell, you're not Ronnie Rinaldi. Stop whistling, start singing. And then I'd sing, and he's like, oh, Jesus Christ, whistle. Like, your voice is terrible. But the one that really, really stuck was Rigor Mortis. He used to call me Rigger. And that was because when, again, the second or third time we were there, I'm in the posh lounge. Aaron's out doing the garden or whatever he's doing, like sucking up. I'm watching Abbott and Costello and eating chocolate. But I'm on Brian's favourite chair, which is a recliner. And I've got my feet up, I've got the remote and blah, 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 blah. And Brian walks in, he's like, what are you doing? You know, your boy's outside doing the gardening and sweeping the leaves. You lazy little bugger, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm watching the telly. And he's like, son, Jesus Christ. He said, am I going to have to get a crane to come and get you out of that chair?
So you were obviously like this on his seat.
Yeah. And he said, it looks like you got rigor mortis. It's like rigor mortis has set in, you're that bloody stiff. So he used to call me rigor mortis because I was lazy.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You're obviously close to the kids as well, and particularly Simon, I believe. You ended up working in Simon's business, didn't you?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Are you comfortable talking about that whole?
I mean, I have to because it's in the book.
Okay.
The closeness with Simon was because I played football for his team, AC Hunters. But also typically I'd see him every day after work for a couple of hours at the newsagents. But then when I started going to work at the newsagents, me and him used to go to games together. Mrs. Clough would make us a packed lunch, and then we'd set off driving wherever we were going to go. And obviously I've started working for Simon. Absolutely just brilliant. You know, I'm still living at Quarndon. I have like a 3-month spell where I'm in digs because Brian was trying to get me to be a little bit more independent. Then after 3 months, I moved back. Then I had another 3 months where I was living with a, what would you call it? Just a landlady. So I was like a lodger. But while I was there, I was still spending like 4 or 5 days a week at Quarndon. And Brian's like, it's pretty nuts, you know, I'm paying this rent for you, and yet you're still here, so you might as well move back. So Simon would come and get me from Mickleover every day, take me to the shop. I'd probably a year of that. With just no issues at all, you know. And I don't want this to sound like a cop-out because I accept full responsibility for it. I have to, you know. I'm not like trying to put blame elsewhere. But I invited my mates to come down and live with me. They were coming down really regularly anyway, you know, going to games, the same kind of thing. I mean, Brian trapped my mates like he trapped me. So again, 3 lads from Southwood who've never been anywhere suddenly, you know, going to games and getting tickets and getting tracksuits and things like that off me. Every time they came down to stay, they'd go back to Sunderland with a new wardrobe because I had so much sports gear. So they were living the life of Riley, and I invited them down to live with me, and only one of them said yes. So we ended up getting a flat together on Trent Boulevard in Lady Bay. And I got him a job as a carpet fitter on Central Avenue. There used to be a place called, I think it was Central Carpets, probably, or Avenue Carpets. And I got him a job as a carpet fitter. And he'd been there a few months. And Simon said to me, listen, you know, if he's coming down to live here and he's working here, why didn't you get him to come and work for me? And I'm like, Simon, I didn't think you liked him. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter whether I like him or not. He's your mate. So if he wants to come and work, he can. So he ended up coming to work in Central News. And I've also got to say, Dino, because I haven't talked about this, that time was absolutely incredible, brilliant. We did some brilliant things. We were, on the whole, we were nice kids. You know, we played a lot of sport. We played a lot of football. It was like a hilarious time, and it was brilliant for me because I was doing it with my mates, my close mates. But eventually what happened was I was going back down to London. My mum had moved to Harrow, and I'd promised my mum that I would take chocolates for Christmas. So we used to, like, you know, 20 Mars bars, 20 Twixes, 20, put them all in a big crisp box. And we do that for the Forest team, for first team and reserve fixtures. So I put together a box for my mum for Christmas, and I'm driving along past the nuclear power station, Radcliffe-on-Soar, just before you get on the M1. I'm like, shit, I forgot the box. What do I do? You know, I promised my mum I'll take it, but I'm already on my way. So I decided I'd turn back round. I turned back round. By the way, this is in a car, a Ford 1.4 LX that Brian gave me.
Oh, really?
I'm 18 and just gave me a brand new F-Reg Ford Fiesta. It was Elizabeth's car. She'd driven it for a year, and then she got herself a BMW, and Brian was like, you might as well have it. You know, you've passed your test now, blah, blah, blah. It'll help you get between Nottingham and Derby instead of our Simon coming to pick up. So I've turned back round, gone in Trent Boulevard, and it was like a tiny little, you know, poxy little place. 1 bedroom flat, tiny little front room, tiny kitchen. And because it was so small, I've got a bed and Kev's got a mattress on the floor, like alongside it. And to get to the toilet, you've got to step over the mattress. So I've stepped over stepped on the mattress rather than stepped over it. And I just felt something crunch under my feet. And I lifted the mattress up, and there's 15 bags of £21 coins under the mattress. I'm like, fucking hell, you know, what? So I waited for him to come back. And I'm like, Kev, like, what's going on? He's like, oh, yeah, I've been taking it in bits from the shop over the last couple of weeks. I was going to share it with you. And I'm like, what do you mean you're going to share it with me? I've already left. I'm like, I'm down in London as far as you're concerned. You're going to share it? No, honest, I was going to share it. And instead of doing the right thing, which would have been to tell him to piss off and to ring the at least, you know, ring Simon, I took half of it. And that led to us over a period of the next 12 months of fairly regularly. And the only reason I'm not crying about it is because I've talked about it so much. But it still breaks my heart. Over a period of 12 months, we stole regularly from the shop after everything they'd done for us.
What triggered that? Was it just a moment of pure madness, or just? We all make mistakes, and mistakes that we can't actually ever rectify. But you know.
Yeah, but I mean, if you know, on the scale of mistakes, that's not a mistake. That's just a horror. There was a couple of things. First of all, I felt like because I was moving away from them and I wasn't going to games with Simon as much, I was going with my mates, and I wasn't going up to Quorn as regularly as I was. Everybody had always told me there'd come a point where he'd get rid of me, there's no way he doesn't love you. There's no way he can do that. Eventually he'll see through you and he'll bomb you out. And then the other thing that happened was me and Simon had a falling out for like a week, literally just a week. You know, it wasn't a massive thing. Brian had gone home, and I'm in Quandon, and Brian's come in, and he's just talking about Simon, and I'm not really registering what he's saying, but I'm just like, Brian, you know what Simon's like, just to get him to shut up. So then Simon comes in the next day, and him and his dad have an argument again. And Brian turns around and he says, even Rigger doesn't like you. He told me yesterday. And I'm like, oh, fucking hell, you know, that's not what I said at all. And Simon's like, hang on, what do you mean? Like, why would you say that? You know, I treat you like a brother. I love you like a brother. And I tried to explain to him that I hadn't said it, but me and Simon fell out for a week, to the extent that he didn't come back and pick me up for work. You know, I had a week off work. And I just, in my own head, I just started thinking, like, everybody's telling me they're taking the piss out of me because I'm doing so many hours for so little money. Everybody's like telling me this, that, and the other. And that's like the only thing that I can think is that I was convincing myself that, like, you know, they were letting me down, like they were treating me badly because I was on £2.05 per hour and I was doing like 40 hours and, you know, I was opening the shop and blah, 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 blah. And I started getting angry with them. I started getting angry with them, listening to other people telling me, you know, it's like, if I sit down and think about it now, it's like, what have they ever done for you? Fucking hell. You know, absolutely everything. And to do that, and again, it's like, it's still, I'm 50 now, Dino. So I was 50 last week. There isn't, honestly, more than 2 days go by where I'm not heartbroken and not sitting down thinking, first of all, how could you do it? But secondly, like, what kind of person are you? Because I think I've developed into a nice character, but then there's always that thing at the back of my mind, whereas, who am I really? Am I the person that I think I am, or am I that scruffy little, scared little, shitty little person from Southwick who did what he did? And I've never ever been able to, and I won't. You know, people have told me, the family have told me to forgive myself. It's not even that.
So how did they find out? What happened?
Well, that obviously, you know, it got to the stage where it must have just been too much. I would imagine it's like end of year accounts or something like that, where they've looked at the profits and they've tweaked what's going on. Simon and Nigel came to me like a couple of weeks before and said, look, there's something going on. We're not exactly sure what it is, but what we want you to do is take a week off work, think about think about where your loyalties lie and where your bread's buttered, and we pay you for that week off, but we want you to take a week off. And I got really angry with him. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's nothing going on. Instead of like just, you know, fronting up and saying. So eventually what happened was Simon came to us probably like November, December time. This is a few months after Brian's retired. Came to us November, December time and said, listen, lads, I'm really sorry, but there's no more work for you because I'm selling the shop. Didn't say anything about the thieving, didn't say anything about that. Gave us 800 quid each to move out because he
knew that he knew that you and your mate had taken the money.
Yeah, he knew, and that was his.
I mean, that's a class way to deal with it, isn't it?
Yeah,
from their point of view,
it is, because I remember like the year later, you know, I've moved back up to Sunderland. I mean, I was just so ashamed about what I'd done and how I acted that I couldn't face anything in Nottingham. So I moved back up to Sunderland, and Brian came up to do a book signing at Roker Park, and I went to see him. And again, at this point, you know, I know that they know, but they haven't confirmed that they know.
Yeah.
And I've gone up to see Brian. Ronnie Fenton's with him. He's took me into the office, give me a big hug. Now then, Rick, how are you, son? I was working in an Indian restaurant for 15 quid a night, cash in hand, plus a meal. Told him what I was doing. And he's like, listen, son, you know, we know what you did. We know that you stole from us. He said we had a meeting about it. We discussed it. We were very, very close to calling the police. And the only reason we didn't call the police is because we took you down to Nottingham to give you a chance of life and to give you a better life. And if we'd have called the police at that point, that would have been your life over. So we decided to cut you loose. And he's like, what I want you to do now is get yourself sorted out, get your head in the right place, get out of this shithole, come back down to Nottingham, and when you're ready, come and say hello again. And I never did.
Guys and girls, get your love in the chat for Craig, please. I mean, it's hard enough life to start with, and then just that amazing roller coaster journey with such a kind of really sad ending through just a silly mistake, really, that we all make every day. All of us make mistakes like that. I mean, it was, you know, it's easy to make, and it's just so bad. I'm just going to pull a question up here from Simon F. He's put it in the chat earlier, but I think it's probably the right time to talk about it. Did you ever reconcile with any of the Clough family?
Yeah. So I should have done it before Brian died. I used to go to, and I'm still like that now. I don't follow a team anymore. I follow Nigel. So wherever he manages, or even when he was playing, apart from Liverpool, because I couldn't bring myself to go there. Every time he's played for a team or managed a team, I've gone and watched them. So I was watching Burton Albion regularly and travelling back. I moved across to Poland. And this is like something that, again, I have to get out of the way. The life that they gave me while I was there was incredible, absolutely incredible, yeah. But also the fact that they didn't do what they should have done, which is call the police, was incredible. But the life that I've had since then, Dino, because of them, you know, the confidence they gave me. Brian always used to say to me, you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. You're brilliant. You can talk for England. You're sensational at this, that, and the other. And I eventually straightened myself out. So I moved to Poland, went to work as a managing director of a major executive search company out there. And then I had my own business, which was really successful. So I travelled back from Poland to watch Burton games. And the weekend before he died, I'd been back, or maybe 2 weeks before he died, I'd been back to the Pirelli, and I was going to go and say hello. And it was like, you know, I've tried to explain this before. The crowds at the Pirelli at that point were, at Eaton Park, it would have been, were like 1,800. So it was harder for me not to see him than it was for me to see him, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I actually just used to have to go in, duck in and duck out. And I just bottled it right at the last minute. I'm like, look, what can I possibly say after all this time? You know, it's not going to work. So I ended up going back to Warsaw without seeing him. And then I think it's on I don't remember the day, but I think it's probably on the Monday or the Tuesday, I get a phone call from Kev just saying to me, listen, are you sitting down? And as soon as he said that, I knew. And I didn't need to listen to anything else. And I'm in my office. I'm meant to be like, you know, professional and a leader. And I just broke down and cried. Got on the next plane back to Nottingham. Went and sat in Central Avenue. Went to talk to Simon for 5 minutes, but obviously Simon wasn't in the greatest shape. Sat on the bench outside Central Avenue for 3.5 hours, and then didn't even go to his funeral because I didn't want to be like, you know, controversial. So after that, I went back home and I realised what a coward I'd been. And I made a decision there and then that irrespective of what was going to be said to me or what the reaction was going to be, I was going to go and say hello and sorry, but also to say thank you to the family. So I went back, I sponsored one of the Burton games. They were playing Burscough in the FA Cup. I sponsored the game. Mrs. Clough was in the corporate area, and I walked up to her and said, Mrs. Clough, you know, first of all, hi, can I have a word? And she said, of course you can, son. And I just said, look, you know, first of all, I think, like, you know how sorry I am. And she said, I do. And then I said, but also, you know, the most important thing for me to say is thank you, because without, like, everything that you did for me, I wouldn't have had any life. And I'd sent her a couple of articles. I'd actually sent the family a couple of articles. We're doing really well in business, where I'd been in like the Polish paper on Polish television, and I sent them the articles because I wanted to know I was doing okay, and it was down to them. And she said, look, you know, we've read the articles. We are proud of you. Brian would be proud of you. We wanted to give you a better life, and you've gone on to do that. And then she said, but you know us, son. You know us as a family. You let us down, and once you let us down, you're out. So that was Mrs. Clough. And then regularly I'd go back and see Simon. I had a beautiful 2.5 hour conversation with Simon, where typically we'd only have like 5 minutes because I'd be so nervous I'd say something stupid. And I just went into the news agency in Bridgeford and I said, Simon, look, I don't care how this goes. You might even punch me in the face and I wouldn't blame you. But I'm not going until we've had a chat. And we stood there for 2.5 hours and, talked about everything, talked about his dad, talked about Nigel, talked about football, talked about us. And at the end of it, Simon said, Craig, I was never sure I'd say this again, but it's been really, really good to talk to you and good to see you. Which is just beautiful of him.
Still hurts today, right?
It's never not going to.
Yeah, I understand.
It's never not going to.
Well, you've got, and if you get to read the messages back, you'll understand that people are supportive. Like I've said, we all make mistakes. Some have bigger consequences than other, but they're all mistakes. We're only human, and try and get through it. There's nothing you can do to bring it back. You've done all the right things. I think the family were incredible with you, guys.
The thing that they taught me is it stood me in good stead. And I mean, when I say, I want to be nice and I want to be decent.
The book's called Be Good, Love Brian. It's absolutely fantastic. We're going to drop Omar's just dropped a few links in there to Amazon. Go buy it. It's a ridiculously good read. And like I said, I hate reading books with a passion. This, as you can tell from, this is just a fraction of what's in here that we've gone through today. I'm going to end on a more positive and funny note, if that's okay, because I'm feeling a bit, and I think some of the chat are crying as well by the look of it. Tell me about Roy Keane. He's got a bit of a strange habit, should we call it, or strange joy of playing football.
So we're away to Man City. At Main Road it is then, and I can't even remember the result. I think they did us. I think we got done badly that day, and it's just a weird day, Piercy's playing left back. Somebody's rolled a ball out to him, and he's gone to control it, but it's rolled under his foot and gone out for a throw in. And Piercy's absolutely launched into the linesman, blaming the linesman for making him lose his concentration. So it's weird when we get back on the bus because Piercy's still trying to blame the linesman. And the lads are like, fucking hell, Skippy. Just admit it. It was shit. It was a shit touch. It was your fault. Stop blaming the linesman. So the mood's not fantastic. We're playing cards. And sometimes I'd get like in the top hearts table, which typically was like Piercy, Des, Webby when he was there and one other. But then the second hearts table was Nige, Lawsy, Gary Crosby, and typically Gary Parker. But if one of them wasn't there, I'd get in the second table. Roy's a couple of seats behind. He's just poked his head through the corner. He's like, lads, he said, I've got to ask like a question. And the lads are like, all right, go on, Roy. And he said, look, it sounds daft, but he said, when you're playing, when you're running, he said, do you ever like just get a semi on when you're playing? And the lads are like, what the fuck, Roy? Like, fucking hell, Roy, of course not. And Keeney's like, I can't explain it. He said, I was running today. He said, we hadn't scored. All we'd done is got a corner. He said, I looked down and I've got a massive lob on. And the player's like, fucking hell, Roy, man, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, blah, 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 absolutely slating him, slaughtering him. And I'm trying to, like, I'm one of these who sticks up for the underdog. So it's settled down, it's died down. And I've gone to Roy. I said, Roy, look, mate, don't worry about it. I said, sometimes, I get like a semi on all the time. I said, I sometimes get one when I'm just sitting on the bus. And Keeney's turned around. He's going, what the fucking hell are you telling me that for? He said, you've got one now, haven't you? He said, you're sitting there with a hard on now, aren't you? Hey, lads, this. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, Roy, thanks very much for that. I'm trying to stick up for you, and you end up slating me. So yeah, Roy got a semi on for winning the corner at Manchester City.
I wonder if he gets one when he does TV now. Can you imagine?
It's like it's difficult to say, like, you know, it's because obviously it's a cliche to say he's passionate.
Yeah.
But I mean, I swear to God, I've never seen a player who had that much desire and will to win, even at that age, even at like 19 years old.
Yeah.
He just, like, you know, the second he stepped onto a pitch, he didn't want to lose anything. He was unbelievable. But to get a start on when you're playing during the game's a little bit weird. And the other thing is the lads are like, Roy, you say you had a massive lob on. No one even noticed. So obviously Roy's like bragging about having a bulge in his shorts, and the lads are like,
Forrest Stan also used to get one by watching Roy. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and like the video. It's been this guy's opened his heart up, so please like the video and follow the channel. And love you all, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Craig.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No worries.